Annyeonghaseyo, sawadee-tukun, konnichiwa minasama. We are going to talk about something very controversial in the world of yaoi or boys love. That's right, guys. We are going to talk about the difference between dubcon and non-con and the glorification of toxicity and good writing when it comes to toxic characters, or what makes the characters so lovable, and if this sends any kind of trigger, then this video is not for you. And if this is not your cup of tea, then feel free to happily exit the video while I see you in the next one. And let me tell you that this is entirely subjective. The opinions on these topics might differ from person to person, so I would love to hear your opinions on this in the comments down below, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because this is an entirely amateurish analysis. So if you have no further issues, let's get started. Now, if you guys don't know, dubcon stands for dubious consent, which means the character appears not to consent for a particular act, but in reality, the character wants to do it and just phrases it that way because it feels illegal according to his societal norms. And dubcon kind of adds flavor to the story, kind of like eating apple with chaat masala. You will find it weird, but ultimately it is very tasty. And this is different from non-con, where a character completely does not consent. And if you're a teenager and if you also love reading these toxic yaoi as a pastime, even though you clearly know that you shouldn't, then congratulations, you remind me of myself. Although it's important to know that these toxic yaoi must stay in fantasy and not be executed in real life, because if they were executed in real life, then you will end up like Saki from Metamorphosis, because newsflash, kids, that's how cruel the real world is. So it doesn't matter if you're reading Boku no Pico or Yarichin Bitch Club. I'm not there to judge you for it, but you should know that these look good in fiction, but in real life they have terrible consequences. So when it is up to me to decide when to draw a line between dubcon and non-con and how much dubcon is too much, then I follow a simple theory, which is to allow the characters to tell their own stories. Now, in Dakaichi, which starts with a very questionable first chapter, we see Takato instantly rejecting Junta. But as the chapters go on, Takato begins to accept Junta and his advances, and we see that both of them are kind of happy in their relationship. Even though Takato behaves like a tsundere and bickers a lot with Junta, we know that he cares about Junta, and he is ultimately happy to have Junta as a partner, which is why I can perceive the first chapter of Dakaichi to be dubcon. I cannot say the same thing for super lovers because a literal child is involved, and also the romance starts in a very weird way. And also, the stepbrother trope is not my thing if you're not planning to explore the consequences or the stigma that comes with it. Now, I can also say the same thing for Jinx. It is non-con because Kim Dan also suffers through the aftermath, and he also has PTSDs of the previous assaulting attack. And Joo Jae-kyung is no different. If anything, Joo Jae-kyung assaulted him worse than Kim Dan's senior. So obviously, Kim Dan's mental health is in tatters, and he just has to get a therapist, not douse himself in alcohol that ultimately causes Joo Jae-kyung to come back to him. However, for Takato, we know that he becomes happy later on, so it doesn't come at the cost of his character assassination, because we know that Takato is written that way. And some of these toxic characters do face consequences for their actions. Like you have Boston from Only Friends, who is left alone in the series. Like his entire friend group kind of rejects him, and Boston ultimately has to move to US. But I don't know what is up with Boston in Only Friends Dream On. It seems like he hasn't learned his lessons from the first season, but I think it's too early to judge while the series is still airing, so I'm gonna do a complete character analysis on Boston after Only Friends finishes airing. Now, if you take characters like Fan Shao or Elliot Huang from ABO Desire, they are very toxic, but ultimately they do care about their partners. And even though Fang Shao repeatedly manipulates Shulang and repeatedly makes Shulang dependent on him, ultimately that's the bond between a narcissist and the victim. And that's how the author wrote their story. So your expectations are set from the get go because you know what kind of characters these two are, and you are willing to be in for a chaotic ride. And you are ready to be traumatized by choosing to read their story. Now, if we go with Elliot Huang, you know that Elliot was acting because of his pheromones, but you also know how much he loves QQ and how much he is even willing to sacrifice his pheromone glands just so that he could be a normal beta and get it on with his alpha. And ultimately, I feel like he is not a complete black flag. So that's how I kind of draw the line between dubcon and non-con. As long as the characters are happy in the long run, you can perceive it as dubcon, even if it is questionable. But if the characters are kind of suffering from the aftermath of the incident, then it ultimately becomes non-con until it doesn't show any sign of healing, and if the partner is genuinely terrible with no chance of redemption. Because ultimately, the character belongs to the author and their journey is decided by the author. We, as the audience, can follow the character and try our best to understand the character's decisions. But at the end of the day, we can only judge the character or not agree with the character. And where I think it fails is when there is a total character assassination and how the character just stops making sense only for the purpose of the plot and to drive the story forward. So that is one of the reasons why I was triggered by Jinx, because it doesn't make sense for Kim Dan's character to put up with Joo Jae Kyung all this time and to follow Joo Jae Kyung and to fall in love with Joo Jae Kyung and to come back to Joo Jae Kyung, because Kim Dan is the kind of person who can speak up for himself no matter how cruel life has been to him. Like, he spoke up against his doctor who tried to assault him, and Joo Jae Kyung is no different. So he should speak up against Joo Jae Kyung and decide to never work for Joo Jae Kyung even if money is the issue. Okay, and at one point I really don't understand why Kim Dan kind of falls for Joo Jae Kyung, and also Kim Dan should have just left when Joo Jae Kyung treats him like trash or whatever. So Jinx also doesn't work because Joo Jae Kyung is not a lovable toxic character. Now, what makes a lovable toxic character is largely dependent on the expectations you have for that character. Like, Vegas from Kinposh is a very toxic character, but you expected Vegas to be toxic. And you also know that Vegas is a part of the mafia world. So mafia world is riddled with all sorts of toxic businesses and it is very dark out there. So you can't expect a person to be in the right sense of mind. So it makes sense for Vegas to be toxic because he is incredibly jealous of Kin and he also has poorly explained daddy issues, which I will get to later. But it also depends on Bible Witchapas's performance as Vegas. And also, Vegas seems redeemable because Vegas nearly died. So that's more than enough reason to get him back into redemption because he got a second chance at life. And he still thinks that he doesn't deserve Pete because of the inhumane way he treats Pete. It's not like he actively goes after Pete to win him back. Pete chooses to come back to him. And although I don't agree with Pete, I can still buy that as character development because Pete is choosing to do this out of his own will and it does not go against his character. It is totally in character for Pete because Pete is loyal to the people he loves and ultimately he decides that he loves Vegas and wants to stay with Vegas for good. Although their problems are going to escalate further with them being in a relationship, I think that their love is just going to be strong enough for them to fight against it or overcome their problems and be in a relationship together. And I just hope their relationship does not develop into an abusive one and they just have a happy life together. So that's about Vegas. Now, why do characters like Fang Shao or Enigma or even other characters who are deemed as black flags in BL work is because either they are too good at their job and setting the expectations of the audience, and we know that characters like these cannot exist in real life. The world of Fang Shao feels fictional. The world of ABO Desire is obviously fictional because we are talking about Omegaverse here. And in case of Fang Shao or Enigma, you know that these guys can get what they want and the power dynamic is really immense and you are here only for the chaos. That's what makes them so magnetic and so lovable. And their partners are also written in a way that feels natural to them and they also have great chemistry with them. Like you have the alpha who is just like, fine, you know what, I love this Enigma at the end of the day. And these two get into a stable relationship, so it is fine. And in case of Fang Shao, you know that this man at least doesn't cheat on his partner. So even though he is like mad possessive and emotionally manipulative and he just doesn't care for anything else, you know that Fang Shao just causes chaos and the story does a very good job in making you believe that. So we come to when the toxicity gets into glorification in Super Lovers or even if you take Jinx as an example, it just rubs off in the wrong way because the author thinks that the story is not toxic, but in reality it comes off as very, very problematic. Like in Jinx, you should have started with Joo Jae-kyung being the focus of the story. We should have gotten to know Joo Jae-kyung more. Then we would have bought Joo Jae-kyung's redemption. Joo Jae-kyung's redemption feels very half-baked and very lazy to me because Joo Jae-kyung just being like, oh, I need to take care of Kim Dan because my mentor said there is something more important than success is just too cliche for me. And Joo Jae-kyung did not die like Vegas and he did not get a life-altering change in his entire career to actually consider what he did to Kim Dan and where he went wrong. So Joo Jae-kyung should have been the main focus of Jinx. We should have learned about Joo Jae-kyung's backstory in the very first chapter and maybe we would have related more to him, like why he does what he does or how he found Kim Dan. And I would have been fine if he kind of did what he did to Kim Dan in the first chapter and I would have taken Kim Dan's no as dubcon. And later, after 90 chapters, when we find out that Kim Dan has had a very terrible life and he has been through a living hell even before he met Joo Jae-kyung, then we, along with the audience, would have found out with Joo Jae-kyung that we all had it wrong from the very beginning and we would have rooted for Joo Jae-kyung to get a good redemption arc and to be a good boyfriend to Kim Dan. But instead, the story goes in the other route and then makes us empathetic for Kim Dan, whose life has been nothing short of a living hell, and it takes a more terrible turn when he meets Joo Jae-kyung and when Joo Jae-kyung is just being this mean, terrible son of a bitch to this guy. And Joo Jae-kyung is just not apologizing for the right thing. Like, sure, man, he apologized for the way he treated Kim Dan, but there are also other things to apologize for, like what he did to Kim Dan in the car, or what he did to Kim Dan at the pool, or even how he gets too possessive over Kim Dan. And even Chua Hee-sung tells Joo Jae-kyung that, listen, Kim Dan would be crazy to accept you back. And yes, I know that love makes people this crazy, but it wouldn't have made sense for Kim Dan's character, and Kim Dan's character goes through brutal assassinations to make that possible. Okay, I don't care how handsome Joo Jae-kyung is, this man just doesn't deserve redemption. Now, if you guys think that I am a yaoi purist right here, I'm not. Okay, I read toxic stuff, but I know when to differentiate between toxicity just for toxicity purposes and toxicity when it is glorification. So if you want to read something like toxicity just for toxicity purposes, then you have Fruits of the Tongue, which is toxic as hell. Okay, it's just 9 chapters, it goes by in a flash, and you will never see panels of threesomes look more artistic. Okay, Twittering birds never fly is toxic, but it shows the consequences of the toxicity, and Yashiro and Domeki's relationship is nothing short of toxic, but you root for them to be together because there is enough character chemistry. Kim Dan and Joo Jae-kyung do not have that chemistry, okay? And this is the same author who wrote BJ Alex. Now, I love BJ Alex because it shows how messed up these two kids are because of the parental expectations, and Alex is kind of relatable to me because no matter how good you seem to others, you will never be good in the eyes of your family, and that's what Alex goes through. And when he finally finds a DG who loves him for who he is and who thinks that he is just a great guy, he just runs behind DG after he realizes that he might have lost DG for good. And then we come to chapter 61, which is hands down the best chapter in BJ Alex. And that's why BJ Alex, in my opinion, stands better than most of the BLs I've read, because at least Alex respects DG's boundaries, okay? And when DG doesn't consent to anything, Alex just doesn't do it. And Alex's job is to gain lookism level of fame. So obviously, he plans to use DG for it. And DG's character is written in such a way that he admires Alex. So obviously, even if DG isn't willing that much, then he kind of consents to it because he idolizes Alex. So even if BJ Alex enunciates the proverb to never ever meet your idols, you can see that this level of toxicity can be tolerable. But for Jinx, it's not like Kim Dan admires Joo Jae-kyung so much, or he actually knew who Joo Jae-kyung was and aspired to be like Joo Jae-kyung. No, guys, Kim Dan is just trying to get by through life, okay? And turns out that he met Joo Jae-kyung on his very first encounter, was tricked by Joo Jae-kyung nonetheless, and then goes through absolute hell to be with Joo Jae-kyung. So Joo Jae-kyung's redemption just doesn't feel natural to me. I still think that these both shouldn't be together, and I still give Jinx like a 4.5 out of 10. Now, this is how I draw the line between toxicity and when it is the glorification of abuse. So if you guys found this relatable enough, or if you guys agree or disagree with my opinion, you can share it in the comments down below. I cannot appreciate you enough for making it till here. Arigatou gozaimashita. Kamsahamnida. Kiyotsukete. I'll see you in the next one.